Our first speaker is Erik Verheul, and he is going to speak about writing history in stone in volcanic Arctic islands, right, Erik? Okay, give him a warm welcome.
Here we go. It all started long ago when I was a very small boy. I had skates like these. Perhaps some of you remember them. The orange strips always came loose. You had to take off your gloves and tie them up, so you got cold hands. And when my hands were too cold to tie them up, I had to go home for some hot soup and sandwiches. And as soon as I could move my fingers again, I was out on the ice again. So basically, that's how I remember my youth as well. Cold winters, cold hands, and a lot of fun on the ice. So I like snow and ice. Later on, I went into mountaineering. And again, I found out that when snow and ice on top of this mountain made it a lot more fun. So, with a passion like that, it was not much of a surprise that I ended up on Spitsbergen, up in the Arctic in 2008. And the travel guide I bought contained a small chapter on Jan Mayen, the island. That was the first time that I ever heard about the island of Jan Mayen up in the Arctic. Now, at this point in time, I'm curious. Has any one of you ever heard of the island before? Can you raise your hand who has heard of it? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's all. Not many. For me, it was the first time. I found out that there was an awful lot of Dutch history on the island. And I was very surprised. Suddenly, this island popped up. Huge amount of history. And everybody today seemed to have completely forgotten about it. So I started to read everything I could find about it. To tell you something about it, this is where it is. Up there, in the red circle, somewhere halfway between Iceland and Spitsbergen, and 1/3 between Greenland and Norway, in the middle of nowhere. If you zoom in, you can see this island. In the north here, there's a huge volcano. I like volcanoes. And it's about 50 kilometers long and 15 kilometers wide, that's all. Today it's Norwegian. It has one small meteorological station, and that's it. It was discovered in 1614, and it happened to be that 4 different ships were there almost simultaneously. So there's not just one guy discovering it, there were 4 ships. And there was a lot of quarreling. I think the first one was an Englishman. Well, we haven't heard of him very much more. And the other were 3 Dutch ships. And they were all sailing for the same Nordic company, but eventually it was named after the 3rd captain who came there, and that was Jan Mayen from Schellinghout. And Schellinghout is a small village about 40 kilometers north of here, close to where I live. And he was sailing for the Chamber of Amsterdam, which was the most powerful. So that's probably why it was not named after the first or the second, but the 3rd captain to come there. And after its discovery, it was used a lot for the whaling industry. You see a painting here. You see the mountain, the Berenberg, the volcano. You see a whale. They were catching a lot of whales. And you see the facilities here where a lot of people were working. Each year there were about 15 ships going there and about 200 people all summer at work hunting whales and cooking their blubber into oil. Until one year, 1632, they came back in spring because in the winter it was left alone. And the installations were plundered, and that cost an awful lot of money for the Nordic company. So they decided to leave 7 people for the winter to protect the facilities. These people kept a diary. I've got it here. And the diary reads like a real thriller. From day to day you can read what they were going through. None of them survived. Unfortunately, they were there all winter, and about a month before the ships arrived, that was the last line when written down in their log. So if you read the log, for instance, 1st of November, we are all here in great danger when we leave our hut in the evening or at night because of the polar bears. They arrive at us before we know it. And that's funny, because in the daytime they were hunting polar bears for fun, and in the night it was reversed. But later on in April, they were already in bad condition. They were sick. But there were also some good moments. For instance, 8th of April, they write, "We've seen so many whales today, we could not count them. There was a huge crowd of them in the bay and in the sea." So that was interesting, because that many whales, we don't see them anymore. They're not that many anymore, that's the problem. But that must have been a wonderful sight, so that's described too. And then 23rd of April, "We lay here in great misery, and there's no one but me who can help himself, and I serve them with great pains as long as God wants it." So all of them are very sick, and there's only one who managed to walk around, but with great pains. And the 30th of April, it says, "The wind northeast, clear sunshine, wet," and that's it. That's where the book ends. And about a month later, the ships arrived and found all 7 dead. So these guys, to me, they're heroes, because they knew very well about scurvy, but they didn't know what to do against it, and they tried it anyway. So for me, these guys deserved a memorial stone. And they got one. This is it. The stone was made in 1912. And the story of the memorial stone is an interesting one too, because there was an Englishman, Mr. Joseph Foster Stackhouse. He said, "I'm going to Jan Mayen Island," and he offered the Dutch government to take a memorial stone for these winters. The Dutch government said, "Oh, that's a good idea." They had this stone made, and they shipped it to the UK. A year later, it came back, because Mr. Foster Stackhouse said, "Well, I could not reach the island, there was too much ice. But if I look at the ship's records, there was no record of any expedition to Jan Mayen that year, so I think he never went." Could be. The text on the stone, "Oudger Jacobs van Grotebroek and his 6 Dutch buddies died here in April 1634 in an attempt to winter." Grotebroek, by the way, is a small village about 40 kilometers north of here, close to where I live. And for the people who paid attention, it's very close to Schellinghout. But then, the stone came back to the Netherlands, and it was lost. It was put in storage here in Amsterdam, on the New Market, in the Wait House. And it stayed there for about 14 years. And then they went to reconstruct the building. They had to get rid of a lot of stuff. And then they found this stone, and they didn't know anymore what it was for. And it said, "The 7 men died here," but that certainly was not in Amsterdam. And they studied it, they couldn't find anything. Articles started to appear in the newspapers. And then someone in Utrecht said, "Oh, well, perhaps it's our stone." And then they recovered that it was the stone for Jan Mayen Island. And this time there was a Frenchman who said, "Well, I want to take it to Jan Mayen because I'm going on an expedition." And then the Dutch said, "Well, there's a bit of national pride. We're going to send a Navy ship." And this is the ship that went there. The Nautilus in 1930. So it was 18 years between the stone that was made and before it was placed. And I found some film fragments from the Scheepvaartmuseum here in Amsterdam from the 1930s. And look at the stone. It's no longer cubical shaped. It's flat. It's about 1/5 of the original weight. And still they needed 2 boats to transport it to the island. There are no harbors there, so this is the only way you can get a stone like that ashore. 24 men carrying it. And when it's there, they had to smoke. Three times a day, and that was it. But the interesting thing is, the original stone was 3,000 kilograms. And I would have loved to see the face of Mr. Foster Stackhouse, who offered to take a stone to the island, and he got this one. He'd been there before, so he knew there was no way to get it ashore. So when the Dutch put it on shore, they started to think about it. Took off the weight, and then it was placed there in 1930. So that was, in short, a bit about the history of the island. There's much more to tell, but little time tonight. But I thought it was a good idea to organize an expedition to this island in 2014. It would be exactly 400 years after the discovery of the island. But that's difficult. It's a small island. There are no harbors. There's one small meteorological station, and only the Norwegian Air Force can land there. It's Norwegian today. So I needed a cunning plan, as they call it. I wrote one, and I thought by myself, well, I work for the Royal Netherlands Navy. If there's one organization good in expeditionary missions, it's the Navy. So I tried to make it easy for the Navy to go there. I tried to think of reasons to go there. The Navy has strong ties with history. A naval hero has been there twice. Marines, they're practicing now in the north of Norway. They could climb the mountain as an experience. We could bring researchers who could do research over there. That would be a nice story. So maybe we could find a camera crew who could make a documentary. I wrote it in a plan. This is the plan. And I think, well, if I give it to my boss, he will give it to his boss. And you have a long line of bosses. One will say that that is not a good idea. So I sent it directly to the admiral, the head of the Navy. Normally that would be a career restrictive movement, unless the plan is very good. But to make a long story short, he thought it was a good idea, and here we went. I got one of the brand new ocean-going patrol vessels, His Majesty Zeeland. On board were 24 scientists of different disciplines and different organizations. We had 8 mountaineers. There was a camera crew, and there was me. And we had 3.5 days, the trip from Den Helder to Jan Mayen. And that was very interesting, because all the scientists were very excited. They could tell a lot of interesting stories, and everybody was, well, interacting. Very nice atmosphere. After 3.5 days, this is what we saw, the island, and that was a magical moment. I'd been working on that for 6 years. It was just a plan. The plan made me write a piece of paper, and then we were there with a huge ship, and we were there. This is the way we went ashore, with small boats. Basically, it's exactly the same as 400 years ago, but a bit more comfortable, because we entered the boat inside the ship, we are launched through a slipway, and then we go ashore. And it's a bit faster than rowing, as you will see in a minute. So these are pretty fast boats, and it is quite an experience to be taken ashore like that. Once on land, this is a picture taken from the middle. You're looking north now to the volcano. Everybody spread across the island. The mountaineers climbed the mountain, and it was a bigger challenge than they thought, and they like challenges, so they were very excited. They reached the top, so that was good. We had geologists, and they were looking for fractures in tectonic plates, because the first thing they asked themselves is, why is there a volcano in the middle of the ocean? And they found a fracture over there on the right side. It's still an active fracture, so they were very excited. Then there were the archaeologists, and they found a 17th century floor, so it could very well be that this floor has been used by these winters. No need to say that they were excited. The whale watchers were watching the whales. The birdmen were watching the birds. These guys were excited because it was the first time they saw that there were geese on the island with young. That has not been seen before, so they were going mad. The Moss men, as we call them. They were funny. What's interesting about Moss, you could say, but these people were very communicative, and when you talk to them, you step into a different world, and it's very interesting, I can tell you. They took 324 different species of moss home, and they're probably still working on it. And this was the memorial stone. It doesn't look too good, but how do you renovate a memorial stone? To be honest, I had no idea. My original plan was to climb the mountain with these mountaineers, but I got a virus infection, and my condition went bad and there was no way I could climb the mountain. And then the Norwegians said, well, we like your expedition, we want to support it in any way, but please remember that there's this memorial stone which is in bad shape. So I thought, hey, there's a new challenge. I had half a year, and I booked a training course in stone carving. I found about 3 different people in Holland who could do that, and one of them was around the corner. So I practiced a lot. I bought myself a piece of granite, and basically half a year, every minute I spent in stone carving. And if you look at granite, because that was the material, this is the original stone. If you zoom in, you can see the bottom half of the letter G, so that's the scale. You see white pieces, black pieces, pink pieces, transparent pieces. It's not just one piece of stone. And if your chisel is not razor sharp, it will follow the structure of the material and not from your chisel. So that was difficult material. And it's hard. My chisels were made of tungsten carbide, which is a ceramic material, very hard, but granite is harder. So you need to get a feeling for the material. So my practice for half a year, well, it was well spent. Back to the island. This is on the north side. There was the Walrus Bay. You can see here, this little spot, it was my cabin. And the stone is more or less here around the corner. If you look on the beach, then you see this triangular rock. Here is the stone. For the shape, there are 2 people climbing it, but it is about a steep hill, and that's where I've been working there. We had 5 days only, and that's not a lot of time for the work. We first made a tent, so when it was raining, I could continue to work. And the first thing I did was grinding the stone. Because of all the erosion, letters had just holes in the material, and there were a lot of other holes, so there was no difference. And when you flatten it, you can already see that it's much better readable right now, just by taking material off. So that took a day and a half. And then started the carving. I needed 2 different chisels, one to make a nice V shape, and then with another chisel to get the material to the right depth. That's a lot of work. It takes about 25 minutes to do 1 letter. The whole duration of this lecture, I could have done 1 letter. And because the material is so hard, I had to sharpen my chisels, both of them, after each letter. With 110 characters, I had to sharpen 220 times my chisels. So this is the difference between the left one I have yet to do, and the others were done. A nice V shape and to the proper depth. So this was the result after 4 days. 1 day to go. Much better readable, but then something happened that I did not anticipate. To explain that, I go back to this picture, and you can see that the difference from the distance from the stone here to the high water line, we measured it with differential GPS. It was 21 meters. This is a stills from the video you saw earlier. This is the triangular rock. The stone is not there yet, but this angle is not as steep. You see a wide beach. The commander's log, no one reads the commander's log. There was a journalist on board who wrote very entertaining stories. The commander's log is very dull. But he said in his log it's 80 meters from the high water line to the stone. So now we enter the scientific part of this lecture. 80 meters then, 21 meters 2014. It comes to an average of 70 centimeters per year that the shoreline is moving inward. So in a matter of years, the stone would be on the beach, tumble over, and will be taken by the sea. So the Norwegians wanted to place the stone to a safer place. They just didn't know how. Then there was a ship with Dutch Marines. They knew about mountain rescue techniques. And together they decided to move the stone. And I was still cutting my letters. And then they said, well, you can stop. We're going to move it. It cost me 1 day. But it was interesting. That was a Dutch-Norwegian idea that was created on the spot. And it happened. And this is the way it was drawn down. And on the left here you can see a shovel. Once on the beach, the Norwegian took over and it was moved to its final destination And that's in the bay. If you go to the left, this is where it was put. Flag on it, ceremony, 3 times hooray. And in the back, you can see a hill with a small cross. And that was the burial ground from Walrus Bay from the 16th century. We think the 7 Dutch winters were buried there. So from a historical point of view, it's a very nice place to put the stone. And that's it, because at the end of that day, we went back. That was the story of the mission. It's a wonderful story. The most wonderful thing was the atmosphere, because of all these scientists who were networking, telling stories. The crew on board was very interested. First they thought, well, weird people, because let's face it, scientists are a little weird. But that worked perfectly well, and it was a very nice atmosphere. The only thing was that the stone was not exactly finished, not entirely finished. But there was a Norwegian Directorate for Cultural Heritage, and they said, well, would you be interested to finish it sometime later? I said, yes, of course. So August this year, 2 months ago, I went to Oslo. I boarded one of those Hercules transport aircrafts, and I flew to Jan Mayen to finish it. This time I had 1 week. And the funny thing is, I said it's very difficult to reach the island, either by ship or by plane, and now I did both. Back in the bay, the cabin in the back, and this huge skull of a whale in the front. It's still there. I put my tent over the monument, because this time it was bad weather. And I need to speed up. This is a time lapse for me carving 1 letter. So you see, it's not just sitting there and in one position. You need to be all over the place. Not good for your back or for your knees, but well, I was already halfway finished. Then I was polishing the rest of the stone and painted it. Nice relaxing work after all the carving. Finally, I put a water repellent coating on it, and then it was finished. And this was the result. So I was very happy to get the opportunity to go back, and it was very entertaining to be in one of these aircraft as well. Never done that. And after a week, I went back, and that's the story. So I managed to renovate my memorial stone. So my advice to you is, if you have some weird idea, why don't you give it a try? Who knows what will happen? This is the stone as it looks, and this is the end. Are there any questions?